And they see me rolling.
They hating. Patrolling, they trying to catch me white and nerdy. Trying to catch me white and nerdy.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Ralph World, where this is part one of our 5-part series where we're going to be taking a look at Doctor Who. Possibly the longest running sci-fi franchise in history?
Not possibly, it is.
Is it?
As of the 50th anniversary, it is the longest running sci-fi series.
Oh, was it? I didn't realize that. Okay.
Ongoing sci-fi series, I should say.
Uncle Britt coming up with the receipts, and that brings us to the introductions. Hello everybody, as always, I am Mac, and with me is...
Uncle Britt.
And today, we are going to be starting the series with first talking about Old Who. What was the first Doctor? What was the date of the first Doctor?
That is William Hartnell.
Yes. And when was his
I don't have the
reign?
on this.
And that starts us off in 1963, the first episode of the first Doctor, William Hartnell. And we are going to take this episode up to Eccleston, the first Doctor of New Who, and one that a lot of people say didn't get nearly a big enough run for his time as the Doctor. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. But I have a brief history of being able to watch the old episodes of Doctor Who on public broadcasting, actually, of all places, when I was a kid, like back in the late 70s, early 80s, even up to the mid 80s. What do you know much about the old Doctor Who? Because honestly, like, even my knowledge is mostly Tom Baker and a little bit of the Sixth Doctor. But until Eccleston and the revival, did you have any exposure or any experience with Doctor Who up until that point?
So, funny enough, this was actually something I found out completely organically on my own. No one told me about it or anything like that. Okay. I was watching TV with my mom in the 2000s, and there was this preview for a show called Doctor Who. Never heard of it, didn't know the British people had their own TV at the time, kind of thing.
What did you think they watched? Did they just import American television? There's a whole channel, even two.
I thought all of the world watched the same stuff at the time. I thought what I watched, you watched.
You were a kid.
Yeah.
I can see that. Yeah, okay, I can understand that.
But they were doing previews and trailers and everything for it, and it seemed interesting, but I had no concept of what the show was. Mm-hmm. Doctor Who didn't make sense as a title. Then they were talking about Time Lords, and it's coming back after 10 years off the air, and I was like, great. Okay. But it stuck with me.
So the revival meant absolutely
no,
nothing.
It didn't.
Okay.
It genuinely did not. But it always stuck with me. For some reason, watching it, and there wasn't a specific point. There's not an image that stayed with me. It was just the feeling I had watching the preview, as corny as that sounds, that it was a couple years later that someone was talking about Doctor Who, and I was like, I remember that. I saw something about that show. What is that show? And they explained it to me in a better term than Time Lord and aliens.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, figured out where to watch it. And the first ever episode I saw was Matt Smith, which is the 11th Doctor.
Okay.
And he is my Doctor. He's my personal favorite Doctor. But
so you didn't even jump in with Tennant or anything. Okay, I always knew that you had said Matt Smith was your Doctor, your favorite Doctor. I don't think I ever realized that was your first exposure. We'll talk about that more when we get to the Matt Smith episode, but that's very interesting. I never realized that.
And strangely enough, the one episode I did watch, I don't remember the name of it, but it was an episode without any companions. So I got just full Doctor from the beginning.
Yeah.
And it caught me. Matt Smith pulled me in immediately, and I was like, I need to watch this from the beginning.
Okay.
And that's when I found out about Old Who and the reboot, and I was like, okay, well, then I need to start from the beginning. And I started researching what it was, found out, William Hartnell and everything. But at that point, there was nowhere to watch any of that stuff. So much to the point that you almost still can't watch any Old Who stuff right now. And even now, most of it's still gone.
Yeah.
So you can't go back and watch a lot of the original Doctor's runs. But the old Doctors always encapsulated me, because I've watched like highlights of them. I've watched like just bits and pieces from their journeys and whatnot.
Encapsulated or captivated?
Captivated.
All right.
Yeah. English is a foreign language to us Time Lords. But the two that stood out to me from the original run is always the first Doctor and Baker. I mean, I feel like Baker stood out for everyone.
He really did, because I feel like, and keep in mind, everything we're talking about is from like the American perspective. Like I know that like across the pond, Doctor Who is like a national treasure from what I understand, that like there's a completely different experience, completely different exposure to him over there. But for on this side of the pond in the States,
Americans,
I feel like a lot of people's first exposure to Doctor Who was Tom Baker, because I think that the Fourth Doctor, that series was the first time they actually brought the episodes over. Like I said, I saw his episodes on public broadcasting on PBS, and as we saw when we were doing some research for this episode, he had what, a 10-year run? Is that, or was it a 7-year run? Baker did as the Fourth Doctor.
I believe it was a 7-year run, but like we found out, that really wasn't seasons. It was more like TV movies, like you said.
Yeah, they were really playing around with like the format of the Doctor, because I think even during, and we'll talk about this when we get to Capaldi's, we'll talk about this more, but I think even during Capaldi's run, there was some rumors or thoughts that they would go back to sort of like the Tom Baker style, where like instead of full seasons, they would just do like mini movies. Like every episode would be like the Christmas special or something, where it was like, an hour and a half, 2 hour long made for TV movie.
What we would call now is a limited series.
Right. But I remember Baker vividly, and I think another reason why he stands out to a lot of Americans is because not only was he really our first exposure to Doctor Who, that is a very striking Doctor.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I feel like when Baker came on the scene, that was sort of like the beginning of what we have now with nearly every Doctor that comes out, where every Doctor has a gimmick. And like, you could take your pick. Like, obviously he's most known for the big scarf, but he also has the curly hair. He has that big hat. It's not a fedora, I forget what it's called, but he has the big hat. He had a very large nose, which if you ever saw any of the episodes, he always emphasized by like when he was thinking, he would tap the side of the nose, which I don't know if you've ever picked up, but sometimes I even do that when I'm thinking. Like I was...
I never realized it was from Doctor Who.
Oh, you didn't?
No, I've seen you do it all the time.
Okay.
Until you just said that. I never put two and two together. Because he even does it in the 50th anniversary. He's like, who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, and he starts smacking the side of his nose, yeah. And he also had like that big burgundy coat. So like he had so much kibble and like so many little things. Like, of course we know we associate the scarf the most. But I really feel like when he got out of like old white dude in a suit and he took on this, that was the start of each Doctor is going to have like a gimmick. And fast forwarding a little bit to like the other Doctors coming up, with Tennant, you could either say it was the trench coat or the All-Stars, the Chuck Taylors. With Smith, it was absolutely the bow tie and the fez. You know what I mean? Like, everybody has that unique aesthetic to them. And you did see that in the Doctors to varying degrees after Baker as well. The one that I think got a little ridiculous with it was, let me see, the Seventh Doctor, where he quite literally had question marks.
A question mark cane.
Yeah.
Or an umbrella.
He looked more like the Riddler than Doctor Who.
Inspiration.
But then you even had the Sixth Doctor, who was another Tom, I think, wasn't? Oh, no, another Baker, Colin Baker, where he had like the patchwork coat. Like, because up until then, it was just guys in suits. And I don't know if anybody listening, like if you're on YouTube, leave us a comment if you know. Like, I don't know if that was his idea or if that was just something that like the producers or the showrunners were like, hey, we're no longer in black and white, we're in color, we need to do something to liven this up, to spruce this up, to make it more colorful. I kind of like to think that Baker had a direct hand in that, because I know now a lot of doctors in like New Who get to like pick like, you know, what their little gimmick is going to be. So like I kind of like to believe that was Tom that was like, I want that scarf, I want that hat, because then that like just starts the whole tradition of the actor getting to dress up their doctor.
Now, I don't have many fun facts of Old Who,
Okay.
but one I do have is about the Fourth Doctor with the scarf. That was a complete accident.
Oh.
Yeah, like, the scarf wasn't supposed to be long at all.
Oh.
I don't remember exactly how it ended up happening, but it was a miscommunication. He wanted, like, a very thick scarf by a certain dimension, and they flipped it, so he got a very long scarf, and they were like, okay, we're just going to keep it.
we're just going to run with it.
Because I don't think he was supposed to keep it either. I think in the beginning it became annoying, but people liked it so much that it was like, all right.
Because I remember, if I'm remembering it right, I remember whenever he could put it on, he would wrap it around his head. It had a very loose hang across his chest. But then, like, the two ends of the scarf almost went down to his knees. It was like a 10-foot scarf or something like that. That's wild, man. That is wild.
And if he ever had it tight, it was dragging on the floor behind him.
Yeah, and like now that's like so iconic, not just to his doctor, but like I feel that's iconic to like, that's one of the things that like you look at that and you may not necessarily think Fourth Doctor, you just think Doctor Who. Yeah.
I mean, it literally came back in the 50th anniversary with the one chick who was like a Doctor Who fangirl.
She was she was part of
Torchwood. No.
Unit. Unit, yeah, she was part of Unit. That's right. Yeah.
She had just that big scarf and was like, yeah, I love this thing. But Old Who, while, like I said, I haven't been able to see a lot of it. From my understanding of other people who have grown up through it and have gotten to see the evolution, that a lot of the issues of Old Who, I feel like, are very much a product of their time. That it's hard to look at Old Who, compare it to New Who. Not that that's what we're doing here, but it's been around so long that to go back to the beginning of the series, like, Hartnell was sexist.
Oh, yeah.
Like, hardcore. Both actor and character were very sexist.
Yes.
That was just the time, though.
It was.
Like, I can't sit here and criticize it when that was everything being produced at that point.
Right.
And it's honestly kind of amazing that we went from such a jaded sort of beginning, and not to say that he was a terrible person or anything, very much a product of the time.
Right.
But such a jaded personification that slowly just edged away over time, that you started getting a very compassionate, like, I don't care who you are, I don't care what you are, there is no one in this universe that is not important.
And I also think it's very ironic with what you just said about, you know, Hartnell, person and character, being sexist. And yes, it was very much a product at the time. But then you also have the other side of it where, like, the showrunner, like the first, it was a woman. Like, and that just shows you like how much of a product of the time it was. And we're not saying it's right.
No.
Don't even think that. We're just saying that, like,
think of the Looney Tunes logo that they put in the beginning of a lot of the old episodes. It's like, if we change what came, it's like ignoring what was there.
Yeah.
But we're not to sit here and say that the cartoon isn't fun to watch.
Yeah.
It's just problematic from when it came out.
But I think that's a big statement as to like how ingrained that was in society and societal norms, that like a woman is running the show, and those are still accepted tropes in the show. Wild times. But I also, like what you said, like some of it is hard to watch, and I have to admit that some of it is. As much as I liked Baker as Doctor Who, and he is very iconic to the show, and he is very important to the show, because I feel like the Fourth Doctor, because it was finally getting play around the world, like that was when Doctor Who started to reach a wider audience.
They could actually experiment a little bit, break what is been the norm for the previous three, which If for those of us watching us, we keep looking down because we have the list of the doctors in front of us, so we just don't mix them up. But
like those first three could be brothers.
Yeah, the first three are all very just like your grandpa.
Yeah.
Like it's that very stern, not to say uncompassionate,
right.
But they're very stern. Like if you're wrong, and you're an idiot, let me fix it.
And the when Baker started to, when the Fourth Doctor started to see like global syndication and started to become I don't want to say a household name, but he started to be recognized more than just overseas in the UK. They were, at the time, they were good, but I go back and watch some of those and it's just so boring. And that, like you said, like the writers did the best that they could. But I think the biggest problem was that, like, you got to keep in mind, this was the 60s, this was the 70s, this was the 80s, when sci-fi was not taken seriously, and they didn't have the budgets for TV that they have now. So they could have some sets, they could have the TARDIS, like, they could, like, have the TARDIS disappear and reappear. They could have rubber costumes. But you didn't have, like, a lot of the tech special effects that you have now with the new one. And I'm not saying those are necessary, but it's very much like, and I might get burned at the pyre for this one, but it's very much like Star Trek, the original series, where like they were doing the best they could. And a lot of those episodes were very well written, were very engaging. But when the episodes didn't work and they had nothing to fall back on for a quote unquote sci-fi show, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I think it's to their credit that they were able to create what they created with the limited budget, and we're here talking about them in like 2023.
Oh, I mean, not even just that we're here talking about it. I am 24 years old. This show is double my age.
Yeah.
And then some. And it is one of my favorite shows.
Okay.
Like, it is in my top 3 favorite shows, and that is a wild thing to say for a show that started like 55 years ago now.
Yeah.
To keep something relevant through good or bad, there have been good plot lines, bad plot lines, good received doctors, bad received doctors. It's there's been a lot happening in the show. Not all of it's going to be agreed upon. But the fact that a show can start there and become something bigger than itself, while still maintaining the integrity that it started with, even though it did have to change, I think that's saying something.
And I think, like, even from the beginning, like, I think this speaks to the legacy of the show and how well some of these characters were written, that from the beginning, like, we still have villains, enemies, aliens, whatever you want to call them, in Doctor Who now that started in the very first series that were created in 1963. The Daleks have not changed much physically, like their shape, their appearance. The Daleks have not
got better props.
Yeah. It's not like just a plunger and a whisk anymore, but like, and they're terrifying. Like when you hear exterminate, like I just keep thinking of that one episode of Doctor Who where the Daleks showed up and they're just broadcasting exterminate, exterminate, exterminate. And like Captain Jack like grabs the members of Torchwood and he's hugging them and he says, "I can't save you." And like you just keep hearing that on a loop and it's terrifying. And like that started in 1963 with people basically sitting inside like hammered out trash cans riding like tricycles. Like that's insane.
It had no right to be scary.
No, it didn't.
Like it
didn't.
When you think of a Dalek, you think of essentially a trash can with a bunch of balls on it and a plunger.
Yeah.
That's not scary.
No.
What I just described is a child's art project. But what they did with the art project is what turned it into something.
The motivation, that mechanical alien, like inhuman voice, and just their relentless onslaught of coming on and coming on and coming on. And then they also like there were the Cybermen too, which I can't remember. I think the Cybermen came out with the first season. I can't remember. But like all of these villains that were established in like the first the first series, while we have new villains, okay, I don't think can really hold up to the original villains. Like sometimes they feel like I don't want to say knockoffs, but like they're kind of like, well, we want to use this villain, but we overuse them, and if we keep beating them, they're going to lose. So we're going to create this species. You know what I mean? Like,
I will say with one exception though, New Who has come out with one monster that I put up there with Cybermen, the Daleks.
I think I know what you're going to say.
And it is Weeping Angels.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care. That is a terrifying episode when they're first introduced.
Don't Blink.
Yeah.
That first episode is like horror. That is, it's fantastic.
And every single time they've come back, it has been a legitimate threat. They have never come back as a joke. Every single time it's been like, okay, this is a problem.
There's one episode that I'm like, they were kind of overused in this, and I didn't really dig it. But we'll talk about that when we get to the Matt Smith episode. And I think you know what episode I'm going to talk about.
Is it Christmas related?
No, it's Angels of New York.
Manhattan.
Yes, Manhattan. Yes. Okay. Yeah, we'll talk about that though when we get to the Matt Smith. Like, and I don't think that's nothing bad on Smith, but it just so happens that episode falls in his wheelhouse. But no, I do think the Angels, they're unique. I think that's what makes them stand out. That like that is a very unique concept for a villain race. Like, and if you overthink it, it doesn't make sense. But if you just accept it for what it is, it's terrifying.
I mean, it's Doctor Who. What did we just talk about? A trash can with balls and a plunger on it was terrifying.
Yeah.
A stone creature that it can only move when nothing is observing it.
Yeah.
And anything that takes its form becomes it.
Yeah.
I can get behind that concept.
Yeah.
Like, this is Doctor Who. You tell me that there's a pickle that can talk. Well, I guess that's just the Doctor's next companion, you know?
So, back to old Who.
Yeah, with the guy with the celery in his shirt. That was a real thing.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. So, outside the Fourth Doctor, Tom Baker, I've only seen a few episodes with Colin Baker, and I've seen snippets here and there of all of the other Doctors. I don't have a lot of experience with those ones. Truthfully, I think the most I've seen them is whenever we see them in flashbacks of episodes now. Most predominantly, what was it, the Day of the Doctor, when all of the TARDIS came flying in, which was just an awesome episode.
And we're jumping the gun on that one, but it is worth noting that the Day of the Doctor, the 50th anniversary of this show, brought every single Doctor for a certain reason. I'm not going to spoil it, but it brought every regeneration of the Doctor to help in one specific thing, and so much to the point that it ended up teasing the next Doctor, which the current one didn't even regenerate into, because, you know, timey-wimey stuff.
I still love that line. All 12 of them? No, sir.
All 13.
I love that.
And then his attack eyebrows.
I know. I love that one, but we'll talk about that. So, since we don't have, I don't feel like we are the people to do a deep dive into old Who.
No.
Like, I just wanted to bring it up so that we could talk about, like, this is our background, this is what we knew about them before. And I'll be honest, like, when Doctor Who was on, and we were watching it on public broadcasting, I didn't get to watch it. I was made to watch it. My older brother was the one that was the fan of it. I was a kid. I was like, what is this? They're talking. There's no action going. No, like, dead serious. Like, and this just goes back to what I mean, that, like, they had a limited budget. They did what they could. But, like, for me, sci-fi, because you got to figure this was also about the same time that things like Battlestar Galactica, the original version of Battlestar Galactica, where they did have space fighters and they did have gunfights and they had explosions and things like that. Never mind that I didn't realize that what I was watching was filmed probably 5 years before I was actually seeing it. But when I found out they redid Doctor Who, and like I said, this just goes to like my limited exposure to it here in America. When I found out they had rebooted it, I was like, oh, why? Like it never occurred to me that like it was going to be like Star Trek or something where like they just keep making shows out of it. That like I thought this was something from the past that was okay. I didn't realize it was as big as it was. And so that takes us to Eccleston, the first Doctor of New Who, who it is worth saying, I completely missed his entire run at first. I found out about halfway through Tennant's run that Doctor Who was back, and I thought Tennant was the first comeback Doctor. I didn't find out until like a couple years later that they were like, no man, there was a whole season with Eccleston, you got to watch it.
You just missed the initial setup and reboot. You were just like,
seriously,
here we are, let's go.
Seriously, because this guy, the last thing I saw him in, he was playing Destro in that god-awful G.I. Joe movie. Yeah, that's the correct response. So let's talk about it.
Sorry. I feel like it is worth mentioning, if we're talking the timeline of the Doctor, technically we're skipping a little right now. There is Old Who that goes up from 1 to 8, and then that's when the series was canceled, and then about 9 years later it got rebooted with Eccleston. Later in the series, what ends up happening is there is a Doctor in between the 8th and 10th, or 8th and 9th Doctor, called the War Doctor. We'll get into him later when he's introduced, but for those of you smart Whovians out there, we didn't forget him, we're just not there yet.
Right.
But yeah, Christopher, he was the one that started it all for really me and my people, my generation. I don't know why I said people. But I didn't care much for him at first.
I had the same reaction. Like, everybody was telling me, you got to see him. He's great. He's fantastic. You know, it's a shame he only got one season, or rather, he chose to only do one season, really. But yeah, when I watched him, I was not a fan of him the first time. Like, he kind of maybe got better with viewings. Maybe got better when you started to realize that, like, he was treading new ground. They really didn't have their feet under them yet. They were trying new stuff that maybe, like, what would later become like the established this is the new Doctor Who of the ages. They were still feeling things out sometimes. Like, I just really thought that, like, it seemed like the Doctor, not Eccleston, like, he was playing it to me that, like, the Doctor was just on meth all the time.
I was not expecting that.
Like, his hyperness, his wide-eyed, like...
It wasn't even consistent either. Some scenes he'd be very, like, even and, like, this is what we need to do. This is how we're going to get through it. And then the next scene, talk to someone else. Back to the Doctor. All right, we need to get out of here right now, guys. We need to go.
Yeah. I was like, it just... And I understand that, like, you can do stuff like that as a character choice. In the next episode, we'll talk about Tennant and, like, when he would do stuff like that. But that was very much like a character. Those were character moments. Whereas, like I would be watching it and I'd be like, this is where the meth wore off. This is where he took another hit. Like, I don't know. It just seemed like artificially hyper to me sometimes. And that's frustrating because I saw him in this version of Doctor Who, wasn't the biggest fan. Saw him in G.I. Joe. We're not going to talk about that. But he's a better actor than that.
He's a very good actor.
Like, did you ever see him in Gone in 60 Seconds with Nick Cage?
Yes.
He's the gangster. He's the villain in that movie.
Oh my God, that's right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and I remember from that movie, because I have that movie, and there was a time where I was, like, watching that every day. Gone in 60 Seconds, I mean. And I would also sometimes watch with the commentary, or I would watch the behind the scenes. And there's the moment where Eccleston's character, the Carpenter, and Cage's character, whose name I can't remember right now, meet for the first time, and Eccleston is sitting back in his chair. And Cage is standing on the other side of the desk. And from where the director was at, he was behind Eccleston because he wanted to watch Cage. But whenever they do a shoot like that, they're shooting from both angles. They're getting like close-ups for both of them. And the director couldn't see what Christopher was doing, but one of the notes between shooting scenes was, I think you need to be a little bit more menacing. I want you to lean forward in the chair. And Eccleston just said, okay. And that's when Cage said, look, I know you can't see what he's doing from your angle, but he is terrifying. He doesn't need to do that. Like, he's a very good actor. And I just feel like, I don't know what happened with his run, because like everyone has been very tight-lipped. He had a one-season run. He left because of what they deemed creative differences, but I feel like there was more to it than that. And both sides, to their credit, have never thrown the other side under the bus. I do think just with the way that both sides are handling this, that it was a mutual, we need to part ways. But I also get the feeling that there's like some bad blood that happened.
There has to be.
Yeah, just for the fact that like he didn't even come back for the 50th, or he wasn't invited back for the 50th. Like, we don't know.
Well, I do know plot-wise they had him coming back.
Yeah.
They wanted him instead of what they ended up being the War Doctor, and they wanted him. They wanted the 3 doctors of the New Who to do it. Obviously, it didn't happen, and like you said, this happened in 2007. To this day, 2023, we have had no word on what actually happened with his doctor.
I don't think we need to, but it's one of those things that's like, what happened? Like, what soured the relationship there? Was it just a one-sided thing? Was it on both sides? The choices that were made as him playing the doctor, like, were those his choices? Because even though we just said that, with Baker and the scarf, there was this thing where like each doctor had a quirk. What was the ninth doctor's? What was Eccleston's? Was it the leather jacket?
Honestly, yes.
The leather, you think?
That has come back. I couldn't pinpoint what episode or anything, but the leather jacket has come back into the show, and a reference was made. It was like, I'm not that anymore. Or, that just doesn't fit me. Something like that.
I don't remember that. I wouldn't doubt it, but I don't remember that happening. But
it wasn't like a big show-stopping scene.
The music stopped, the acting stopped, the camera zooms in. Smith is wearing the leather jacket, looks right at the camera. This just isn't me anymore.
Eccleston's just a profile picture fades in and out real quick.
Almost like subliminal messaging.
You will not forget Eccleston. But it's funny that your reasoning for disliking it was that, because when I watched it, because like I said, I started at Matt Smith. I didn't just watch all of Matt Smith. I watched a couple episodes with Matt Smith just to get into it, see if I'd like it, just to see what it was all about. And then I went back, watched Eccleston. I didn't like him because off of coming from Matt Smith to him, which is an unfair comparison because that was at least a whole different doctor apart. They have found their footing by that point.
There was at least 3 or 4 years between them at that point,
But I couldn't help but make that comparison when I went back and watched it, or when I watched it the first time. But when I went back and watched it again, things started clicking that... For me, his character made a lot of sense for the way he approached it because of what he was just coming off of. Like, he just came off the war. He just came off of everything he did with the Time Lords and the Daleks and all of that weighing on him. Just, finally getting out of the War Doctor era. And, again, this is spoilers for later with the War Doctor, but... For me, that gave his whole character context. Because the War Doctor, like we find out, is the one that did everything in the Time War and the one that was the Doctor when it was impossible to be the Doctor.
Right.
So then the next Doctor that followed him, the one that actually picked back up the mantle of just Doctor...
But when they were filming that, they had no idea any of this was going to happen. So, I guess what you're saying is... take the War Doctor out of the equation and just imagine that the Ninth Doctor was the one that had to do all of this.
No. I'm saying the War Doctor gives it the context for me.
See, but that's I can't get behind that. I understand what you're saying. I completely understand what you're saying, but I can't get behind that because now you're asking for a retcon to give substance to something that was filmed like 3 years prior.
I mean, if you take out just that the other generation, it's still the Doctor that did it. He's still dealing with the same emotions.
Yeah.
It's just the War Doctor was the personification of that time. So even if you take the War Doctor out and just say it was the 8th or 9th Doctor that did everything, to me, that's still the same character growth going into Eccleston's. That he still did everything in the Time War, and now he's trying to just be the Doctor again, and he doesn't quite know how to do it. Because like we were just saying, the first 3 Doctors were very stern, stoic-ish people. And then he kind of got quirky. He kind of got funny.
With Baker.
Yeah. And so when you get to Eccleston, it kind of feels like a duality of that. Okay. Sometimes he's trying to be that stern Doctor that he was in the beginning. Then other times he's trying to be that more quirky, fun-loving Doctor that seemed to gravitate more with people around him.
And that actually, the people being around him and the person, you mean, being around him,
Hey.
he didn't have much time to do other than one companion. So we're not going to get on him about that. But I do find it interesting that he only had one season. It wasn't even a full season, I don't think, was it?
No, it was a full season.
Was it a full season? Okay. He only had the one season, but so much of what happened in that one season still affected the show.
Oh yeah.
I'm not even sure. I'm not sure I would say that it's still affecting things now, but it was still affecting things well into the Matt Smith years.
Oh, yeah.
Because you had the introduction of Rose Tyler. You had the realization that the Time Lords and
Daleks.
not Gallifrey. You had that the Time Lords and Gallifrey were just gone. Okay, so you had all of that stuff that set up the playing field for the new Doctor. And I don't hate that the first Doctor only got one season, because even looking at it in retrospect, I think the first Doctor of the new series only having one season maybe should have been something planned. Maybe it should have had that, because you had all of these pieces put on the board. Okay, Daleks were back, Time Lords were gone, Gallifrey was gone, Rose Tyler, and then you end it with one of the most iconic aspects of Doctor Who, regeneration. So that by the end of the first season, he regenerates, and it's just now everything comes together. This is Doctor Who.
Everything came back. Everything's reintroduced, but it's also re-explained in a more contextual thing, because now it's not where, we had a Doctor, he got sick, we got to figure out what to do. Okay, let's introduce regeneration. Then let's introduce this.
Yeah, because that's one thing that we didn't talk about when we were talking about the old Doctors, was that the concept of regeneration was because the first Doctor, Hartnell, the actor, William Hartnell, had lung cancer.
It was some kind of cancer,
and he couldn't go on, but he loved the show so much that the concept of regeneration was his idea to let another actor take on the mantle and just run with it.
Which I gotta say is a wild concept.
It is a wild concept, especially for the 60s.
Even in science fiction, it's a crazy concept.
Yeah.
But on the actual real world end of it, to actually pitch that and convince them hey, just recast me in the context of the show.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine how that pitch went.
I can't either, because especially at the time, and there's parallels. I don't believe I'm bringing this up, but right now, Cavill has finished his run on The Witcher. Okay. And a lot of the fan base is freaking out that Hemsworth, Liam, is coming in next season. And this has nothing to do with him taking over the role, but the fan base and even some publications are well, how are they going to explain this? How are they going to explain this recasting? And I'm you don't have to explain it. TV shows, movies, recast characters, recast actors all the time. I think that, to your point, is what makes Regeneration just completely wild. That it was in a time where you could just recast somebody, like
James Bond.
Yeah, James Bond. They recast James Bond. There were two husbands in Bewitched, an old sitcom. Like, recasting was not a new concept, that they could have easily just put somebody else in the role and kept going, but that the fact that Hartnell came up with the idea because he wanted the show to keep going on, that's a very selfless actor right there. The show is bigger than him.
That was what I was about to say. To get to a point where you believe it's bigger than yourself, even though, for all intents and purposes, at the time, you were the show.
Right.
Like, I'm sure people were like, I can't see anyone else being this but him. And now, I mean, you almost get that with every Doctor.
Right.
Like, you're like, dude, I can't picture anyone but Matt Smith being the Doctor. I don't know what to do. And then Peter comes in and you're like, okay, this is all right. This dude's old, whatever. Right. And you get through a season, you're like, that was pretty good, I'm not going to lie.
And then you get at the end of the 3-year run and you're like, I can't imagine anybody else being the Doctor.
You're telling me that someone else is going to be cast besides Peter Capaldi? Like, do I need to say that out loud? Peter Capaldi is the Doctor. What else do you want?
But bringing it back to the end of Eccleston's run, you see what I mean? Like, I think the ninth Doctor, the first Doctor of the new series, I think it was a blessing in disguise having him for one season, because like it tied the reintroduction up perfectly. That like you have the Daleks, you know, the Time Lords were gone, but like they acknowledged the Time Lords, they acknowledged Gallifrey, the TARDIS, you know, the companion in Rose Tyler, and then you cap that all off with Regeneration, and it's like at that point of Regeneration, ironically enough, even though one Doctor is coming out and another one is coming in, like when he regenerates, that's when you can just sit back and say Doctor Who is back. You know what I mean? Like I really feel that way, that like they may not have planned one season for the ninth Doctor, but I think it kind of worked out.
No, I agree with you. I think it is a detriment to Eccleston specifically that we only got one, because just speaking on his performance, I would have liked to have seen what he did on the next season, like after they found their footing. It was the first season back. I'm sure there were restraints on it that like, you have to do this, you can't do this. And I would have liked to see the second season of him where it's like, okay, you have a following, you have proven that this works, let's try to do something. Because that's what ended up happening with Tennant. They just tried certain things with him. But I think one of the genius things that they did with the first season was Rose. I think having the character of Rose and her whole like independent, strong persona, that she wasn't 100% reliant on the Doctor in every situation, much to detriment sometimes, but she did her own thing.
Right.
And so it kind of felt relatable in a sense that like not everyone who was with the Doctor was a damsel in distress or just someone who was there because the Doctor said, hey, come along.
Well, and that, I feel like that goes back to what we were saying about when we were talking about like the original run of Doctor Who, that was very much a product of its time. The damsel in distress trope became a trope in those in those early years. And lasted far too long. But yeah, like, to the credit of the old show, I do appreciate that whenever they brought in a female companion, which it was almost always a female companion, that it wasn't always the Doctor and a love interest. I mean, like, yes, you would have some times that like you would see like the companions like would develop a crush, but sometimes that's all that it was just a crush. And we'll talk about that because we saw that very much with Amy in the Matt Smith, that like, yeah, she was crushing on the Doc, but she loved Rory. You know what I mean? So like, I appreciate that like in the old ones that it wasn't that like every female companion was a love interest, which was also ironically something that I kind of dug about Rose, that like the Doctor fell in love.
And like, it wasn't a crush. It wasn't this just like spur of the moment thing. It was built.
Yeah.
And that actually leads into what I was going to say. In addition to just the character of Rose, having her stay past the first season, I think, was a genius move, not because of what she ended up doing, but from an audience perspective.
Dealing with the regeneration.
Exactly. For us, that's brand new. Even if you watched old Who, new Who, that's a brand new thing.
Yeah.
Regeneration's brand new. We don't know who's coming in next.
Right.
This is a fresh concept to us. So to have Rose, who watched the Doctor with us, understands what's going on, but then this new thing hits, and it's like, who the crap is this guy?
And when the Ninth Doctor, when Christopher regenerated, even though we would only, been riding with him for a season, it was still very heartbreaking because when he was talking about all the places that he wanted to take Rose, all the things he wanted to show her, and she was there, she saw him change. And like, that was heartbreaking in and of itself. But then when Tennant shows up and he says, "Where were we?" "Oh yeah, Barcelona." And he just continues the conversation like nothing happened. Meanwhile, she's like, "Who is this dude?" You know what I mean? Like, that's tragic from her standpoint. Like, that is tragic. She can't comprehend what just happened. Didn't know regeneration was even a thing. Just saw the man that she was falling in love with turn into this completely other dude, this completely other new guy. And he's continuing the conversation like nothing happened, other than
the same clothes.
Yeah, other than saying, "Oh, I have new teeth." That's tragic. That's horrifying. And like, the look on her face, she played it like, what's her name? Billie Piper. Like, she played it fantastic. Like, this loss, this horror, this confusion. What is going on?
And I've said this many times before, regeneration is one of my favorite things Doctor Who does.
Yeah.
And it's always because regeneration is always met with this bittersweet approach. Because it's always like, yeah, the Doctor's not actually dying. And like, that in and of itself is great. You know he's going to heal himself. You know he's going to walk out of this scenario. But in order for him to do that, they have to lose what they are for whatever that iteration of the Doctor is. And that is wildly depressing, because you go from Eccleston, in your mind, the meth doctor, to Tennant,
Yes.
who just had that seething, burning rage underneath the surface all the time.
Don't use up the good stuff too soon. We'll talk about that next episode. But yeah, I know what you're saying.
But just that contrast.
Yeah.
And then you have Rose sitting there, and obviously she doesn't pick up all this in the immediate second after he regenerates.
Yeah.
But it is just like, you're the same person, but you're not.
And I love, and I know this, once again, this is skipping, and we'll talk more about this, but like, there have been doctors where regeneration is just a thing that happens. And then there have been doctors where they don't want it to happen. And I think they did this really well, because I feel like in the original series, now keep in mind, I'd only seen 2 regenerations happen. In retrospect, in like, clips, I've seen the regeneration from the first Doctor to the second Doctor. But like in canon, in story, I've only seen it twice. But I feel like the original series played regeneration that the Doctor and the Time Lords just accepted that this was something that happened. That like, it would be the same like if we broke a fingernail off and we were like, okay, a new one will grow back. And I like that it changed with New Who, with the new Doctors. Like, their look at regeneration changed, how they feel about it. But I also like how whenever they do acknowledge it, it's because I've done this so many times. Like, it's wearing on them. That maybe it used to be something that was just something that happened and they were able to accept it and they would ride with it. But after they've changed faces and personalities so many times, there is that whole, the original me is getting lost. I can't do this anymore. And I like that they didn't just change it for the sake of changing how the Doctor approached regeneration. There was for something as ludicrous as regeneration, there was a very real consequence to the mentality and the emotions of the person that is enduring it. That's like, yeah, I can see this starting to wear on people. I can see this starting to be like, I can't do this anymore.
And go back to old Who, there were points where you had like the episode of the 3 Doctors.
Yes.
Then you had an episode of the 5 Doctors. And those episodes showed you that, they're all the Doctor, but you're really starting to see differences.
Yeah.
Like there's this Doctor who does it this way, this Doctor goes this way, and a lot of times they conflict with each other because they just would approach it differently, even though they're the same Doctor. So even to go back then and them interacting with each other and realizing slowly when I change into this person, or, I was that person, I'm not acting like that anymore. It does. I would imagine for any entity, because this person's not human, that it would just start to wear on you.
And I think that was another, like we had talked about, that the pitch idea for regeneration had to be completely ludicrous. But I think it was a brave choice for the time, because like if you tried to bring out something like that now, Doctor Who never happened, regeneration never happened. Somebody now comes up with that idea. Sci-fi and fantasy have gone down so many different avenues that I think that if somebody came up with that idea now, we would be like, that's genius, that's great, that's fantastic. In the 60s, you didn't know how people were going to respond to something like that, if they were going to buy into the idea, if they were going to believe it, or if it was going to break the show. But then I think the other brave choice that they made, because Doctor Who was so highly rated, like especially in that first season, that was one of the reasons why William was like, this show needs to continue. To let the next actor change who the Doctor was, personality, like, you've been with, I'm sorry, I don't remember how many years Hartnell was the Doctor. I think it was the original 3. I think he was the original 3.
I believe it was 3, but then he came back for
a couple
specials,
of
like the 3 Doctors, the 5 Doctors, because he lived a while with cancer.
Yes, yeah. But like, you've been watching this actor perform a character this way that is like one of the highest rated sci-fi shows in the UK at the time. And then not only are you changing the actor, you're changing the base character. And you're just hoping that the audience is going to go along for the ride. And they did. And it's fantastic. And like, you're right, regeneration is a wild concept. And because of that, like, it is so iconic to specifically Doctor Who, that if you had any show that even tried to do anything remotely like it, I don't think it would work, because the first things out of your mouth would be, that's regeneration, you're ripping off Doctor Who, come up with something better. Saying that, realizing we're living in a entertainment society right now where there really are no original ideas, but I think there are certain ideas that like we as viewers and audience and fans will give a pass to, like the Force, for example. That's basically just like a combination of like magic from fantasy and psionics from any other, like mental powers from any other sci-fi. You took things like telekinesis and telepathy and just put like a mystic spin on it, okay? Sorry, the Force isn't that original.
But I will say, it is almost synonymous with those powers now.
Right.
You see someone move something with your mind, you're like, hey, he's got the Force.
Well, and that's the thing, like, going back to, a little sidetrack here, going back to The Witcher, he has a magic sign that he can use that lets him put out a force blast. I think it's called Ard or something like that. I can't remember what it's called. But when I'm watching it on Netflix, I jokingly said, yeah, he just started force pushing people. But if you tried to do regeneration in any way, shape, or form as a plot point, like, you could maybe get away with it once.
Like if it's something that you just work up in story to get there for that one time, sure. whatever.
But
you can regenerate. That's not like a trademark concept.
Right. But if you tried to make it a character,
the main character of a show, it'd be like,
Yeah.
oh, he just regenerates into new actors. No.
No.
That's Doctor Who.
yeah. I don't think we as viewers, as fans, as an audience would really take to that being pirated for some other show.
Just to even remove the pirating aspect of it, that you're just ripping it off, like, it's not even a device that's going to work on multiple fronts. Like, if you have 5 different shows doing that, where the main character just is recast all the time, you're going to get sucked out of it.
Yeah.
The reason it works for Doctor Who is because it's unique.
Yeah, and it's part of the character. Like, from the first time Hartnell regenerated into the second Doctor, I'm sorry, I can't remember the actor's name.
Patrick?
Okay. So from the first time that Hartnell, wow, what is that? Is it Troughton?
Troughton. Patrick Troughton.
From the first time William Hartnell regenerated into Patrick Troughton, you accepted that that's part of the character. You accepted that this is something the Time Lords can do, and you know it's going to happen again. And if you don't have that setup that makes sense, not that this technically made sense, but you're dealing with a race of people called the Time Lords, for goodness sakes.
It works in context of what it is.
Yeah. That it's just not going, it's not going to happen. It's not going to work out.
And I think it's worth mentioning that we've talked a lot about the first Doctor and the fourth Doctor, which are arguably the most iconic Doctors out of the original run. But the second Doctor had almost an impossible task.
But pulled it off,
He
man.
did.
Yeah.
Because he made his Doctor different enough, but still kept enough of the original Doctor, because that no matter what you did, you had to still basically be the first Doctor.
Ironically enough, I feel like this ties back into what we were saying in our last episode about the Turtles. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, that like they keep changing the backstory or the setting, but they keep the core elements of the Turtles.
Yeah, no,
You know
exactly
what I mean?
like that. Like the Turtles have not been around as long.
No.
But like they don't need regeneration. Every new property on the IP is just straight up like, this is new.
Yeah.
We're going to take the Turtles that you know, and we're going to change the details. And sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. You can pick and choose which ones you like.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I've yet to see a Turtle experience that didn't feel like, these are the Turtles.
Yeah.
I have yet to see with the Doctor, arguably with Jodie, but we'll get into that. I have yet to see with with any of the Doctors where I was like, this doesn't feel like Doctor Who.
Right. Yeah.
It feels like, okay, this may not be my favorite iteration, because like they're all not my favorite. Eccleston, I like him. I like what he did, like we were talking about, but he's not my favorite Doctor. He doesn't. He had one season. He doesn't do enough for me to be like, oh, this guy gets it. This guy's going hard or anything.
And that's something that I really like about this show. Everybody has their favorite Doctor, depending on when you started watching, what character traits, characteristics you latch onto. Everybody has their favorite Doctor, and I absolutely love that. And I also love that, like, you and I have different favorites, and we'll talk about who our favorites are when we get them. You've already touched on it a little bit, but like
mine's Matt Smith. I think I've already said it. But
Yeah.
Mine's Matt Smith.
we'll talk about that more whenever we get into those Doctors. But like, I've never met somebody say, well, Tom Baker is my favorite Doctor, and then somebody says, well, David Tennant is my favorite Doctor, and then those two people fight about who the best Doctor actually is. No. The best Doctor is the Doctor.
Yeah.
Everybody just has their favorite versions of him. And I think that's fantastic. That, like, I don't feel like there's a huge... In this day and age, with, you know, the influence of, like, online media, like, I think it's impressive that there's not this huge wedge. At least I don't perceive this huge wedge in the Doctor Who fandom about, like, the Doctors.
And remember, guys, we're not in Britain Central. We're not
Right.
up to
Yes.
date
Yes.
on who as they might be.
Yes. But you know what I mean? Like, you have your favorite, I have my favorite. I don't think you're wrong. You don't
No.
think I'm wrong. You know what I mean? Like, I think that is fantastic about this fandom.
Like, I think anyone can pick out flaws of other doctors.
Yes.
And I think that's only right. Like, Matt Smith is my favorite. I won't sit here and say that his seasons are without flaw, whether it's Matt Smith's performance, the writing, the show running, whatever.
Right.
I'm not going to sit here and say it was flawless. No doctor is flawless. As someone on the internet once said, that I just think rings true to Doctor Who no matter what you're doing. Every season has an episode that you don't want to rewatch. Like, it's a corny sci-fi show. Sometimes you're going to get really, really good highs. Sometimes you're going to get aliens that fart. Like, it's just weird sometimes.
Well, that's something interesting. Let's plan on that for the next episode. Whenever we start talking about the individual doctors, what episode don't you want to rewatch? If we can come up with anything, because right now I'm thinking of Eccleston's run, and I really can't. Keep in mind, I've only seen Eccleston's full run like maybe once, maybe twice. I can't think of anything, because I also have a problem with remembering which ones are his and which ones are Tennant's.
But even in that sentiment, that is a good sign to the show that no matter if it's Eccleston, Matt Smith, Colin Baker, it feels like Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Like, you're watching it and you're like, I could see any of the doctors doing this. And then obviously, if that's your favorite doctor, you might get a little offended by that, because you're like, well, why wouldn't you remember it's that one? But it's been around for like 50 years. Come on.
So we took a little break, and we were trying to think of what episode for the Eccleston series like we don't want to watch again. And honestly, we can't think of one off the top of our heads, because you saw this happen, you heard this happen in real time. We just had this idea, and we're not saying that like Eccleston's run is perfect.
Yeah. Eccleston had no problems. That's why he got one season.
And we can't think of the particulars, because I haven't seen them enough. I don't even think I've seen all of them. Like, the first time I saw the Eccleston ones was into the Matt Smith years, because that was when BBC America started doing the Who-a-thons. And I had known that Christopher had been the first Doctor, but when they started doing the marathons, I was like, hey, I actually get to see him now. But then, like, you don't get to watch every episode of a marathon. So, like, I don't think I've seen all of them. But I would be curious as to, like, what people think, like, the one bad episode of the 9th Doctor is. And we already have ours for the 10th, and we'll talk about those in the next episode. But
for those of you who have seen Doctor Who, you might have an idea of what episode it's going to be. Just think of a sidewalk.
Come on, man. But something else that Eccleston set up that I thought was a great addition to the Doctor Who lore. I don't think they ever really gave him a proper send-off. We gotta talk about Captain Jack.
Oh, dude. Captain Jack Harkness was awesome.
Yes.
Just a fun side character. Like, that is what he started, was just a fun side character. He gets a little convoluted as things in Doctor Who become later. But him, Rose, and the Doctor was like the trinity of the first season.
Yeah.
Jack was later. He wasn't as prominent as Rose. But those three, it felt like those were the ones you were bouncing off of. Those were the three that you were getting invested in the show.
And then when Jack became immortal, and then he had his own way of time traveling, that wrist device. I can't remember what it was called.
Time Vortex?
Yeah, that's it. And so, like, now he's immortal. Now he's a time vortex. I don't mean this in a bad way, but he's kind of a knockoff Time Lord at this point. That after those changes and Jack grew into what Jack grew into, I didn't consider him a companion anymore. I'm not saying he was quite an equal with the Doctor, but he was on a different level than, like, the regular companions. That, like, when Jack showed up, it was like the Doctor had somebody that he knew I can send him to do X, Y, and Z while I do A, B, and C. And he knew things were going to get done and they would meet back up. Like,
I would put him on level with River.
yeah, that's a very good point.
Not quite a companion, but in the same vein as a companion. Just the next step up, I would say.
That's a very good point. Like, oh, could you imagine him and River doing something? Like,
they did. They have, I'm pretty sure. No, I lied.
No.
He's interacted with Jody.
Yeah.
He came back to interact with Jody, and then they did an interview where he was like, I need an episode with River.
Yeah. Seriously, those two together would be fantastic. That's the spinoff that they should have done.
Dude, that might just be porn. Two of the most sexual people in Doctor Who, both who have a hard-on for the Doctor.
This is very true. I didn't. So yeah, but I loved what Jack. Now that you mention that, like, it's almost like Jack was like the predecessor to River, like to the idea of bringing in somebody that had some of the same abilities as the Doctor, but not a full-on Time Lord. That's very interesting. Like, I wonder if the creation of Jack Harkness did influence bringing River into the show.
I mean, I'd have to imagine, at least to a small degree, because, I mean, we can't speak too much for old Who, but to my knowledge, there's never been, like, a reoccurring side companion who's not there weekly.
Well, in the original, I can't remember what her name was, and I can't remember, and I may be way off on this, because, like I said, my exposure to the original series is limited. But I can't remember what her name is, and I can't remember what Doctor she first showed up on. But there was a female reoccurring Time Lord that would, like, just party with the Doc on occasion. That, like, she would go on. She was almost like a liaison between him and the Time Lords. That, like, she would go work with him. That she showed up with probably the same occurrence as, like, the Master did. Okay, that. The Master wasn't always there, but you knew he was like he was there. You know what I mean? Like, and that's one I can't wait to talk about in the next episode. Is like the reintroduction of the Master. I thought that was. We'll talk about that. Yeah.
I think is worth noting that while the Master was prevalent in old Who, they didn't jump the gun with it. They didn't start out with like, okay, he's going up against the Master. That's his biggest enemy. Like, that's his arch rival. That's, someone who's brain for brain with him. No. Introduce the Doctor, get him on his own 2 feet, bring back the Daleks. That's another iconic character. Don't give him his equal yet.
And I think that's something that Doctor Who has always been good at, not just with the Master, but with the Daleks. Maybe not so much with the Cybermen. Sometimes they overuse them. But I feel like the writers know how to space their villains out so that, like, it doesn't turn into, I'm just going to say it. It doesn't turn into the Joker. Like, when in the 70s, the 80s, the Joker could be gone for, like, years at a time. And yes, a lot of that had to do with the Comics Code Authority because of the type of character that the Joker was. They didn't use him because it would, like, there would be friction with the Comics Code Authority. But I think that was a blessing in disguise because it made the Joker all the more menacing whenever he would show up. That, like, if you do something now, how the Joker shows up seemingly every month in the comics. He had his own title for a while. I don't think it's going on anymore. Or even if you're a fan of Star Trek, that, like, they just completely nerfed the Borg because they kept using the Borg, or like in DC Comics, they keep using Joker, that the hero has to win. Otherwise, there's no story. So if Batman keeps beating Joker, if Starfleet keeps beating the Borg,
they're not a threat.
They become toothless. Like, they really do. Like, there's no threat to them anymore. That I think the writers of Who, old and new, have really got that good balance of, we're going to bring them in. This is the time to do it. But even when the Doctor does win, he very rarely has a clean win. It's always by the skin of his teeth.
As a matter of fact, you just saying that, the end of Eccleston's run, his last episode, he has the phrase, just this once, everyone lives.
Yes.
Except himself, because he's the doctor and he wasn't going to say it.
Yeah.
But yeah, like Rose essentially committed suicide, sucking in the vortex.
Yeah, bad wolf.
Yeah, and then she was the one that gave Jack his power. If you're watching this, man, spoilers, you're way into this at this point.
For something that came out in 2007.
Or 50 years ago. But yeah, like she gave Jack the powers of immortality. Yeah. She was essentially going to die herself, and then the doctor...
Until you just said that, I actually completely forgot that she was the reason.
Yeah. And the doctor was the one that was like, this almost never happens, but I'm going to save everyone.
Yeah.
Like, everyone is going to be okay.
Yeah.
Except him.
Yeah.
But, as we've said, believe it or not, the show didn't end there. Someone else continued.
Yeah, so like when they bring these iconic villains in, it's not just that the doctor runs roughshod over them. There's more often than not, there's a price for the victory, and I appreciate that. And I also appreciate that, like, they don't always bring out the Daleks. They don't always bring out the Weeping Angels. They don't always bring out the Cybermen. Like, they don't always bring out the Master. So that whenever you do have these villains, these iconic villains show up, you know it's about to get serious. You know it's about to get real. There's that uncertainty of, is someone about to die? Like,
and it works from both an audience perspective and a character perspective. Yeah. When the Daleks show up, almost every single time, the Doctor almost switches.
Yeah.
He sees the Dalek and this is not a joke.
Yeah.
I'm not playing around. This needs to end now.
Well, like that episode we were just talking about a few minutes ago, like when they just kept piping, exterminate, and like, yeah, there's fear. Like, even for the Doctor, there's fear.
I mean, Eccleston sees a doctor for the first time since, he...
Sees a doctor?
Wow. Eccleston sees a Dalek for the first time since the time, he ended the Time War and all that. And one of the first things he does is freak out, grab a wrench, and just start hitting it.
Yeah.
Like, that, the Doctor's not a violent dude.
Yeah.
For a character to literally be chained up by itself, powerless, but the fact that he exists made the Doctor so angry, he immediately started attacking it. And granted, it's a wrench. He knows it's not going to kill it. But just the fact that he does it in pure anger should tell you a lot.
Yep. Yeah. And that's another thing that we've been talking about. Like, the common thread of the first season was it was putting all of the pieces back on the board. It was resetting everything. It was reintroducing people to old tropes. It was introducing people to new ideas. The biggest new idea I can think of that we touched on that came out of the first season was just the fact that the Doctor fell in love. Like, it's pretty impressive that they waited that long for the Doctor to actually fall in love with one of his companions.
And to be clear, we are aware that the Doctor had a daughter that was the companion to the first Doctor, so we know he's loved before, but this is the first time it's been with, like, a human companion.
Yeah.
Like, it's been someone he chose as a companion, as a friend.
It's the first time we saw it on camera.
Yeah, like, we actually watched it evolve, and it did evolve. Like, I don't think Eccleston was in love with Rose. I think he started to fall for Rose. I think Tennant
fell.
Tennant loved
the 10th
Rose.
Doctor. Yeah, and we'll talk about that next week. And I think this is a great start to the series. Just like with that first season, we've put things on the board. These are the things we're going to be talking about. We've sort of hinted at things that we're going to be talking about in future episodes. So please come back, watch episode 2. We're not going to be running these week to week. We're going to be running it probably, month to month.
Ideally, the first Friday of each month is Doctor Who time.
We missed it this month, but that's because we wanted to get the Turtles one out in time with the movie. So this is the second Friday, but next month and following will be the first Fridays of this series. We'd love for you to come back and join us. Let us know what you think about Doctor Who if you're watching this on YouTube, use the comments.
And I do want to leave you with one thing about the Doctor. This is a character that's been around for over 50 years, over 55 years at this point, I believe. And it is a main character that has been around and has fought enemies, gone through war, and have saved people. And I think it is very worth noting that this is a character who was designed to have two hearts and not carry a gun, but carry a tool. And as cheesy as that sounds, I think that is a very noble pursuit from a creation standpoint. And I have a lot of respect for Doctor Who for that. It is genuinely one of my favorite shows. And I think just small things like that is to say a lot. Like, a character has two hearts does not play into any plot. It doesn't play into anything except to say that this character, this dude, this being has so much love and care for other things that he couldn't have a single heart.
And also, just for us, for us from the standpoint, there is a lot of lore, there is a lot of year behind Doctor Who. We're going to forget some things. Yeah. We're not doing it out of malice. We're not doing it because we don't care. There's just a lot to talk about.
Yell at us in the comments.
Until next time, this has been Ralph World.
Ralph World.